What's the most out-of-touch thing you heard from rich people? You/princess_coldheart responded. Back when I was in my early 20s, my beat-up old car broke down in my job's parking lot when I was about to drive home. I was getting paid $10 an hour as a pastry chef at a catering company. This was barely enough to cover my rent. I was obviously pretty distraught over my car dying. My boss, company owner, ended up saying to me, "Why are you so upset? It's just a car. Just buy another one." I couldn't even respond, I just looked at her like she was crazy. You/Drytown responded. If you can't afford childcare, just hire a nanny. We love ours. You/EQ replied to this with, I hear this kind of thing so often on Reddit, it's mind-blowing. Just hire a nanny, just hire a doula. Oh, and make sure to hire a backup just in case, just hire a night nanny a couple nights a week. Like, yeah, you're right. This parenting thing would be way easier if I could just hire a series of people to do it for me. Granted, at least one of them elaborated they weren't from the US and anyone in their country rich enough to own a computer had hired help, but that's mind-blowing in its own way. You/Supertoast64 responded. I occasionally drive minibuses for a private school in the UK, have overheard some very privileged conversations from the students, but one that sticks out is, a tutor on the bus asked a student what he says when other students make comments about the very expensive watches he wears to school, to which he said his response is, "My dad has the same 24 hours as your dad." He then proceeded to go on about how his dad inherited a massive entertainment chain and various hugely successful companies from his grandfather. You/Irrelevant Trumpeter responded. How could your family accountant let that happen? When talking about how growing up, we couldn't pay the bills and had our water electricity shut off multiple times. You/Alfuboboa replied to this with, Mine is a story my dad likes to tell about the first parent meeting at my college orientation. The school spent 20 minutes talking about tuition payment plans. Then the mom of a kid LD met earlier in the day raised her hand and asked, in genuine confusion, as if everyone else in the room was stupid, "Why would anyone bother with all that when you could just write one check for the entire year?" You/Kobarbob responded. Company event where people with investment properties told us that you just need to save hard to get that deposit. Just don't go out to dinner with your spouse as much, or just go to the pub every other Friday. Ah yeah, so reducing restaurant dinners from 0 to 0 and the pub tab from 0 to 0. Still broke. My colleague left the Zoom midway through. If it was in person, he would have broken the door on the way out, or came across the conference table at them. You/Key_Kong responded. I needed a bicycle to get to a new job. Found someone online selling a really nice bike for cheap, so got in touch. Took 2 trains to their house to buy the bike, and when I got there it was a mansion. The bike was in a garage full of supercars and classics. They asked me where my truck was to load the bike on. When I told them I was riding the bike home, they laughed, and before I knew it everyone in the house had been called to the garage to hear how I was riding the bike 3 hours home in the dark. No one offered me a lift, they just acted blessed at how they didn't have to do such things. You/Striker511 responded. I was a live-in super of a building in Boston. The building was 43 units, 40 were college kids. One year a young girl moved in next to me and 3 months later her electricity was shut off. She started pounding on my door demanding that I turn her electricity back on. I checked her circuit breakers, they were fine. Went into her app and immediately noticed the pile of electric company mail on her table, with big red letters, last warning. Me, you didn't tell the electric company that you were the new tenant. Tenant, what's the difference? Why do they need to know it's me? Me, they need to send you a bill for electricity usage. Tenant, now I know you're messing with me, you don't pay for electricity. She moved out 2 days later of embarrassment, her parents having to pay for breaking the lease. She couldn't look at me for those 2 days. You/conscious_raisin_436 responded. I work for a startup based out of San Francisco. I'm a remote employee halfway across the country, and am therefore a sort of second-class citizen. My direct peers who work in SF make at least double what I do, and they almost all had extremely privileged upbringings. They went to top 10 business schools, they summer in Tahoe, that kind of thing. I was in the home office a few months ago for our annual kickoff meeting, and one of the speakers polled the room, has anyone here worked at Amazon? Nobody raised their hand. Wow, I'm surprised. I said, does warehouse count? And the entire room erupted in laughter. For certainly, LD just told a very enjoyable joke. You/Pumpkin Spiced Bimo responded. The I wanna say 12 or 13-year-old son of one of my clients literally expressed confusion to me when I asked them where I could get more paper towels from when they ran out in the washroom of his parents' however many $1 million yacht. He said something like it's always there, what do you mean? He was so disconnected from the process of cleaning and restocking that he just thought that stuff would always be there and never run out. LOL. The look of genuine confusion on his face was just something else. That's not the first time I experienced that either. Talking to the kids of extremely wealthy people is always a trip. Just another particle responded. I wouldn't consider this out of touch, but I was definitely amazed. Several years ago I worked at a retail store that sold a lot of different items. I was on the cashier one Friday afternoon when 3 young women, early 20s, walked in decked out in luxury brands. They bought a suitcase and several other random items that totaled almost $400. Once I announced the total price, one of them pulled out 4 Benjamins like she was pulling out issues and handed them to me without looking. I asked if they were going on a trip. One of them answered, no, we got sick of carrying our stuff. I mean, I get tired carrying stuff too. But damn, to buy a whole suitcase and more just because they were tired was crazy to see. Pathofuncertainty responded. Once had a college-age co-worker explain to a bunch of us in EMS, try to explain that his family wasn't that rich because they only have a beach house, not a summer house, and then explained the difference between the two. Another co-worker then went to pull up his apartment complex and pointed out the trailer park next door. Rich co-worker then remarked that it must be nice to live next to a storage facility, referring to the trailer park. He didn't believe us when we explained that people lived in those trailers. He thought that was only something that happened on reality TV shows. We all hoped that inner city EMS would help bring him back down to earth, but it had no effect. Candicanalane responded. Owner of the company I used to work for was a car guy. His daily driver was a giant, fully kitted out Chevy Tahoe that he rarely drove more than just himself in, and he also owned a Ferrari, 1 or 2 Mercedes, and a Jaguar, I think. Specific models I don't know, I just know they were pricey. One day after I had worked there for a couple years, he came to our office in NorCal and tossed me the fob to his Tahoe and said, I need you to drive this down to Paso Robles, our office on the Central Coast, about a 5-hour drive, where he is based out of. When I asked how I would get home, he said he would make sure I get taken care of. When I asked how he would get back home, he said, my Ferrari that I'm picking up from the shop. Later in the day, I asked him to show me where his windshield wiper controls were since rain was expected during my drive. He said it's all automatic, and when I asked how that works, he goes, how old is your car? Very nice guy that gave out generous bonuses every year, but he was pretty out of touch with us normies. Garqua responded. A really rich kid I worked with, well, he was like maybe 25 or 26, was out to dinner with us on a work event. He ordered a bottle of wine from the sommelier and the sommelier indicated he no longer had that vintage but he had a similar vintage. He also explained, politely, the cost delta. The first bottle was going to be $750 and the new bottle would be $825. Rich kid looks around the table and asks, is that a lot? Our boss just said not if you're buying. But if I'm buying you better pick something else. I've told this story before on Reddit but it's still one of my favorite examples. EasyB responded. Doctor told me to work with my personal trainer to figure out a routine that wouldn't make my chronic autoimmune disorder worse. I asked if he was going to cover the cost of a personal trainer out of his own pocket. BC Insurance sure as shit won't cover it, and LVE never been able to hold a job in my entire adult life because of said chronic autoimmune disorder. Dude was shocked poor people exist and one was in his office. Jezebel_Majora replied to this with, I'm on social security due to chronic illness. ATM went to the orthopedist because of pain. It was winter. She said cycling would help my hip pain and to just get an e-bike. They're fun to use. And so easy, I might even lose a few pounds. When I told her there is no way with my financial situation, she looked dejected for a few seconds before suggesting to wish for one for Christmas from my family. I still don't own an e-bike. Mr. Funktastic responded. I was telling a cute girl I met at a friend's birthday about a boom I was reading, The Zanzibar Chest. It was about a British journalist whose father was some minor colonial official. The journalist traveled extensively as part of his dad's work and his own. I mentioned wanting to travel to less popular destinations, always wanted to go to Mongolia. My grandfather got lost in the desert there once and it was a wild story. Her response was that I should just enjoy my life and go. I know lots of people who travel a lot, so the advice was not that outlandish, but I mentioned family I was taking care of, things I needed to save for, and not having flexibility at work. It became a point of contention like, no, you just have to say fuck it and go. Your family will understand. My grandfather had late-stage Alzheimer's and we were taking care of him at home. He didn't know my name, much less understand things. This car smells funny responded. Me and my ex were struggling financially when we first got married. I made enough to pay the bills, but there was nothing extra. She decided to enroll in school, and when she was filling out the FAFSA for financial aid, she asked me what my adjusted gross income was for the previous year. I have always done my own taxes, but at the time always threw the paperwork away when I was done, so I had no idea what it was. Our friend who was at our house at the time came from a very wealthy family who owned a hotel chain, had government contracts, etc. Without a second thought, he said just call your accountant, they'll have it. He was baffled by the fact that having a personal accountant isn't something everyone has. Blew his mind. U/Elquaffle responded. This from the UK's current PM, so we'd realise that, as someone worth more than our king, he can resonate with those he represents struggling in poverty. He was asked if he had ever gone without something by an interviewer. All sorts of things, like lots of people. There'll be all sorts of things that I would have wanted as a kid that I couldn't have. Famously, Sky TV. So that was something that we never had growing up actually. U/KC_Frosty responded. My sister's ex was born into a rich family and was so out of touch it was unreal. He was the poster child for spoiled white bro. He was racist, homophobic, misogynistic, and downright rude. His parents found him a fancy job making very good money, so he immediately threw it in my face that I'm lazy and stupid for not finding better jobs. I have a disability and it's incredibly difficult to find work. He told me, if you don't like the job market in this country, leave. Easy for a rich spoiled brat to say when mommy and daddy's money can pay for your cruises around the world while I'm struggling just to find my next meal. I'm glad my sister dumped his dumbass. U/equivalental Sopod 7717 responded. My sister was on a train with Sunak around the time of the Queen's funeral when he was a backbencher and Truss was still in office. She said he was deeply awkward among normal people, didn't want to or even knew how to interact with them, and seemed quite uncomfortable with people knowing who he was. Someone struck up a conversation with him and apparently he was like a toddler, his words were excessively polite and clearly on rails. The weird thing was that this didn't seem deliberate or haughty, he was just genuinely out of touch and didn't understand the world around him. She also noted that everything on his person seemed to be brand new and in perfect condition, including his rucksack, pen, he was writing cards for his staff apparently, and even the jumper he was wearing. He also wordlessly refused the LNER first-class service despite having paid for it. U/Bradwasherasara responded. Had a person in my office who we all joke about is like a distilled pure boomer. He got talking about Hurricane Katrina for some reason, talking about how stupid everyone was for not evacuating. I told him many of the people in NLA didn't have the means to get out even if they wanted to. He said I know times get tough, but sometimes you just have to crack open that savings account. I was dumbfounded. To be so out of touch that you think the people stuck down in the 9th Ward had a stash of money they were just sitting on. U/Weatherpig Shavewings responded. I did some medical volunteer work in Haiti post-earthquake. Stayed on a Christian missionary compound because the clinic I worked at was supported by the mission. At dinner I was talking about the bathroom at the clinic, basically an outhouse, and how instead of toilet paper there was a bucket with torn up book pages. The only reaction I got was a gasp followed by I cannot believe they treat books that way. I was speechless. Like if that's what you took away from that, I cannot help you. U/soon-to-be-married 43 responded. Everyone in my life who has told friends to just buy a house because paying rent is stupid when it could be a mortgage instead. I get their angle, but the people they'd say this to haven't been able to save up enough for a down payment, and exclaiming as such was met with something along the lines of why not or confusion at the idea of having to save for something like that in the first place. Someone once asked me why I have a mortgage and didn't just pay cash outright instead, because mortgages have interest, so if you just pay with cash you won't have any interest. So I said our loan was $170,000, but if we take the full 30 years to pay it off, we'll have paid nearly as much on it as our home is worth after interest. Would you be willing to pay off our loan so we can pay you instead of the bank? First he said no, followed by why. Not why followed by no. That says it all. Thank you for watching. If you like this video you might enjoy the rest of my content, check it out.